Hi, everybody, and welcome back to On the Roof. Today we have a wonderful guest coming from Toronto. Yes?
Yeah.
Vasanti Kea. Hi, Vasanti.
Hey, Scott. Pleasure to be here today.
The
Hello,
pleasure's all
everyone.
mine. Um, you are a Tantra therapist, right? Can you explain exactly what that entails, what the title means?
So, the word Tantra in the West has been very much convoluted and diluted with a lot of ideals about, that Tantra really is all about sex. And a lot of that may be true in some circumstances, but a lot of the work that I do is really about the holistic picture of our wellness. So, in many of our traditions, our religions, even yoga, they refer to the body as being something that we have to transcend in order to find God or to find spirituality, and that the limitations of our body are kind of lower vibration, and they don't acknowledge the fact that we have sexual organs or come from sexuality and are sexual beings. So, Tantra is the only ideology and philosophy that includes our sexuality in the whole picture of our wellness. So, a lot of what I do, I work with the people one on one in touch. So, I'm a massage therapist, and then I work also with people in through coaching and guiding meditation. So, a lot about that is just how to actually integrate and incorporate our sexuality into the greater picture of our entire wellness, of our human wellness.
Yeah, so a Tantra therapist encompasses many different approaches, right?
Definitely. There are people who, for example, come to me because they've never experienced orgasm before. And this is very common for a lot of women who have experienced sexual trauma or who have just experienced any kind of shock in their lives or any kind of accumulated energy in the womb
Hmm.
area. A lot of women come looking for that. Many men come to me because they are suffering from any kind of erectile dysfunction or premature ejaculation, any kind of sexual dysfunction, really. And then I get a lot of couples who come through who are just looking to find more holistic or more sacred ways of connecting. And this can be through sexuality or can be just through presence and meditation. And really, everyone can benefit from this because we've all, in some way or another, been cut off from our life force, our life source energy, which is our creativity and our sexuality. So, a lot of people just come because they are ready to experience what integration of their sexual energy might feel like for the first time, maybe in their lives.
Right, because so often it's just we're taught to deny it.
Well, we're taught that it's something shameful. It's not money that makes the world go around. I believe it's sexuality. And sexuality is what can be driving money a lot of the time. So we've been taught that this is something that we have to hide or be ashamed of. And the tantric movement that's coming through the West right now is really just inviting us to, again, integrate this piece of our lives into our vibrancy, into our aliveness.
Mm. You know what comes right to mind? You're just so young. Like, how could you know so much?
Well, I've been studying it. I've been studying it pretty heavily for about 8 years now. I've been teaching it internationally for four. So, when something happens in our life, some kids it's professional sports. They just get obsessed with baseball and then they don't do anything other than play baseball.
Yeah,
It was how when I went in search of my own healing and my own integration of my sexuality with my spirituality. And when I was on that journey, when Tantra came to me, it was just like a godsend that finally there was somewhere I could go or some books that I could turn to that would actually address sexual desire or fantasies or pleasure.
right.
So when I discovered that, that was the end of that, and I just started diving in.
Did you come into this search based on personal trauma?
Absolutely. So I absolutely, I went through my own stories of childhood sexual abuse, and my way of dissociating from that or trying to heal from that was to actually be with a whole bunch of lovers and have tons of sex. But it wasn't the kind of sex that was nourishing for me. It was the kind of sex that was actually very detrimental and draining. It wasn't honoring my body, it wasn't honoring my spirit. It was very empty. And this kind of, I was always searching for connection.
Did you recognize that? Like you're in your teens when this. I mean, if you're going back, right, 8 years prior
Hmm.
to, at
Hmm.
least 8 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Were you able to identify it as that?
At first, no, but after a while, just don't find what you're looking for. And then I realized that what I was looking for could never come from outside. It had to come from within. And that really, there's no one who can give me pleasure. There's no one who can give me an orgasmic, alivening, awakening experience. That has to come from myself.
What do you think is the biggest misconception with, for lack of a better term, normal people's um, definition of sexuality?
Well, I think perhaps the greatest affliction that's facing our society is the ideals of performance. So that sexuality or a sexual encounter should be quantified either with orgasm, how many orgasms she has, or, how many hours can he last, or, you know, it's really this idea of what we can give to the other, or what we can make arise in the other, when really it's about the connection with ourself. Of course, with our beloved, we call it making love. We cultivate this energy field of loving and luminous vibrations. But I think the greatest misconception is that we have to put on a show, or we have to somehow quantify or measure our sexual experience.
That must be multiplied so greatly these days with internet and the level of porn that's out there and everything else that people don't even get to decipher like what you're calling as sacred. It's hardly
Yeah.
descripted that way there, right?
Yes, there are cases of 17-year-olds being hospitalized for overdosing on Viagra.
Unbelievable.
So it's, that really we have been taught that our sexual prowess, if you will, is like a performance, is a show that we have to put on, prove to the other how virile we are. And we lose up on so much sweetness like that. We lose on so much connection that we can really have with ourselves.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, would you say you define yourself through your sexuality or by your sexuality?
No, I wouldn't say that. I don't think that it's something I define myself with.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely a way of life. It's definitely a spiritual path. Someone who does a lot of yoga doesn't define themselves as a yogi.
Well, they might.
They might.
That's
I
why
mean,
I asked.
I myself as a tantrika because I practice tantra, and I guide people in, integrating and incorporating it in their own lives. So in that way, I do classify myself. Yes. I think in, different life situations and experiences have, I've passed through my own suffering and trauma around sexuality, and my own need to heal it was so great, and my own desire to find some other way of relating with my sexual energy was so great that it's turned into a life calling, it's turned into a career, and I definitely feel an obligation or a responsibility to our society as a whole, just to be the channel or just to be a messenger of this wisdom, because I really believe we need it. I see less and less my work like a massage therapist and more like a social activist.
Social activist. You know what? It's a little. I've never heard this put in that context before, but with all that's going on right now, and that somebody is owning, you know, her own growth. It's amazing. It's great. It's very refreshing.
Yeah, well, I just think, I really believe that so much of the suffering in our world is rooted in the fact that most of us are operating from the head and heart. Most of us are operating on this kind of autopilot, detached state of existence. And that state can flourish and can really thrive when we're cut off from our sexuality. And this doesn't mean to say that you're not having sex. It means to say that we're not necessarily linking our sexual energy with our whole energy. So when we're cut off from that, we're cut off from our compassion, our sensitivity, often our integrity. There's just a general sensitivity or a sweetness or a softness that someone who is really connected with their own body and their own softness, they're just softer with other people. They're just kinder with other people, more patient with other people. And I believe our world is operating on a mass scale from a place of detachment and individuality and really cut off from our sexual energy, which is the seat of our creativity. So if I can help someone or guide someone through getting in touch with themselves in that way, the ripple effect is enormous. You
Oh,
know,
it's
if we're working with a CEO who's all of a sudden linking, that erection, that morning wood or whatever, that erection, all of that, and he's linking it with his heart,
mm-hmm.
and then his heart is commanding his head, as opposed to the other way around. I bet you the CEO is going to treat his staff better. And maybe he's even going to make more environmentally conscious decisions because he's connected to his own vibrancy, his own lusciousness, his own beauty. The ripple effect is so much bigger than we can imagine. And that's why I think this work is so important now.
As you say this, I'm reminded of a project I was working on. The first thing I really did, film wise, was a story about retired fighters. And these guys were the most, really, really generous, thoughtful, conscientious, loving guys, but they were hardcore. They were street fighters. These guys all fought in World War II. They were men. Their machismo was in the day, like they were idolized, like boxing in the 50s, late 40s, 50s, or that era was they were what it was about, so they kind of represented masculinity. Now, always, I'm big on this masculine feminine thing right now. The reason these guys in their later years were so secure in who they were, because they've proven themselves and their masculinity. There's no question what they're about. But so it's a decision. It's not like their ego is pushing them to be nice. They're nice because that's what they want to be, because they don't have to be a tough guy. They don't have to show up or posture in any particular way. So now what you just said and what it stirred in me as you were speaking was almost like the ultimate femininity, where you're not being pushed and pulled per se by society and the ways and the conditions that the concept has.
Mm. I
The
think a lot
stigma
of
that the word carries, even simply that.
Yeah, I think so much of it is simply identifying what voices are ours and what voices are our conditioning. So our culture, women were raised to think that we're supposed to look like Pamela Anderson, and men were raised to think they're supposed to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. And no one does. So when we relate to ourselves in the way of our conditioning, we think I'm not beautiful enough, I'm not skinny enough, I'm not sexy enough, or men think I'm not strong enough. The list goes on and on. So when we're able to identify what is real for me right now, so the way that we approach making love or the way we approach anything, if we can do it in a way that's authentic for us and really feels good for us, then we're free.
Right.
So much of it is just that we're bound, and a lot of us don't even know it.
Right, but that's why it's really good. It might sound a little weird to say, but it's healthy to hit a bottom. Like for you to have to suffer the level of trauma that you had to go through to break through it.
Absolutely.
Because
Well,
now, does judgment matter to you? If I was in judgment of you right now, would it matter to you? Right?
not
That's
one bit.
security. That's the ultimate security.
Mm,
Like that confidence is, it doesn't matter.
yeah.
Think whatever you want. I'm good.
Yeah. And that really, I think that is the coming home to the heart. So much about Tantra is spoken about in a sexual context. And I, of course, work in that context as
Right.
well. But really, my tantric journey and what I love guiding people through is actually living from the space of the heart.
Right.
It's really, there are some sacred geometry mandalas from ancient India that depict downward facing triangles and upward facing triangles. And in the middle, a dot. This is called the Sri Yantra. It's maybe the most famous tantric symbol. And these symbolize the downward facing triangles signifying the feminine,
Right.
and the upward facing triangles signifying the masculine, the upward three triangles signifying the upper three chakras, and the lower signifying the lower three chakras. And where they meet is the heart.
Mm-hmm.
So really, Tantra is about, for me, is about bringing the lower kind of primal sexual energy up to the heart, and then bringing all of this mental conditioning, the blah, 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 the monkey mind, the ego, down to the heart.
Right.
And there we're free.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but what you do is you incorporate that sexuality into your mindset so that you carry it through your day, through your night, through your life, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to compartmentalizing it, taking like a section out of your routine. And then when it's over, you go back to your life
Mm.
as opposed to incorporating it in. Am I right?
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's really, for me, about integration. It's really about, okay, how does my sexual energy or my sexual life, how does that ripple into my work life? How does that ripple into my family life? How does that ripple into all of my interactions and my creations? And also creating the divide between sex, the sex act, the act of intercourse, and sexuality as a whole. So Osho says, for example, Tantra is the cake. Tantra is the entire cake. And the tantric sex is just the cherry on top. So it's really
I'm not going to ask you where the icing comes from. I'm not going to go there. I wouldn't do that because I'm not.
separating between the act of sexual intercourse or sexual interaction and just sexuality. So if you look at every flower, this is the expression of sexuality.
Right.
Look at every fruit, every human, this is the expression of sexuality. And when I mean living in that space of the heart and living in that lusciousness and vibrancy, it doesn't mean you're, having sex with tons of people. It might not even mean that you masturbate. It might mean that a breeze blows through your hair and it feels completely electric. That's sexuality.
Does it involve like a switch being flipped, like as simple as allowing it in,
Yeah.
allowing it to be okay, as opposed to just dealing as conditioned?
Yeah.
Moving forward, I'm going to trudge through my entire life as conditioned,
Yes.
instead of being a little more open minded and what you welcome the approach, so you're open.
Absolutely. It's so much about just allowing. So tantra, people often have this conception that it's uh something very mystical and something very profound, and that somehow it's difficult. They say, "Oh, I can't get into that. It's too crazy." There's nothing that tantra puts over top of us and says, "Take this and incorporate it." Tantra for me has really been about removing all the layers of the shit that's been put on top of our natural orgasmic ecstatic state. So shame has been put on top, trauma has been put on top, conditioning has been put on top, misogyny has been put on top.
Right.
All of bullshit is on top of our natural, beautiful, sparkling flower that is our sexual energy. Women who come to me and they're just in pursuit of this long lost or never felt orgasm. Oh, I just want to have the orgasm. I just want to have the orgasm. And I say, you're never going to. If you approach it like that, like the goal that you're going to reach, you will never get it.
Right.
It's not something you hunt for. It's not something that you pursue. It's an allowing.
It's a letting go, right? Letting go
Like
of all the.
allowing to envelop and take us over. It's not something we can go pick up at a store or something someone can give us.
What's the greatest thing it's afforded you? This lifestyle.
The greatest, I mean, the effects in my life have been absolutely transformational, profound. It's owning my sexual sovereignty has empowered me in countless ways. The one that first comes to me is assertiveness in boundaries. So many of us don't know we have boundaries. So many of us don't know we're allowed to say no or we're allowed to say yes. Um, so many of us are thinking we still have to be nice boys and nice girls. And I know for myself, and I think for many, many women out there, I wasn't a pushover. I was still a strong-willed woman, but I would just so easily let my personal space be violated, or just say no when I mean yes, and say yes when I mean no, kind
Yeah.
of thing. So what Tantra has allowed me to do is actually reclaim the bridge between my sacral chakra and my throat chakra. So the sacral chakra is where our sexuality lives, our creativity, the seat of our emotions. And in some Vedic teachings, it's directly linked with the throat chakra. So this is obviously where we communicate from,
Right.
how we our truth. So
Mm-hmm.
these two, typically when one shuts down, so does the other. And because I was operating from a trauma, a place where there was much trauma existing, which was my sacral chakra, my throat chakra was also cut off. So I wasn't as assertive or expressive as I would have liked to be. And now I feel an immediate, like, I can check in with my belly, with my body, take a breath, and I know exactly what I want to say and how to articulate it because my throat is also activated. So that's the first, not being afraid anymore to tell someone no, not being afraid to, if I'm in a sexual encounter with my husband, even 5 years ago, I might not have been able to say, honey, maybe we could slow down a little bit, or maybe you could just do it, a little bit differently.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have been able to say that. I probably would have just kind of endured it, which is silly and doesn't do anything good for
Right.
anyone.
Even if you speak up after the fact, it's still not the same as not allowing what you're not comfortable with in the moment. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. I
Exactly.
can only speak for myself, but there's times when you say yes or no to all kinds of things, and it's that, again, it's that image, the machismo, and it's all bullshit. But I'll definitely say, oh yeah, women, yeah, you stick up for yourself, but it's a personal thing, and as the more I learn about this whole balance of masculine, feminine, it's like you're no different than me. You're a female, and you are different. I mean, but at the same time, where you want to find similarities instead of differences
Yeah,
in order to grow,
absolutely.
right? So not to say, oh well, females should view things this way or respond or react or perceive things in a certain way, and men are supposed to see, perceive, and feel things this way. Maybe not. It's not absolute at all, and often it's more closer to the middle than it is distant.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I used to work exclusively with men actually because there is right now, perhaps for the first time in a long time, so much support for the spiritual and sexual ascension of women. There are
Right.
just so many incredible female feminine movements going on. There are for men as well, but it's not as readily accessible. And there are so
There's a
few.
stigma that comes to it for men. It's almost like you can't admit
Yeah,
anything. In fact, let's not even talk about it.
exactly. And well, the only time where it is talked about is in the context of performance. So
Right.
you
Right.
come into a conversation about vulnerability. Oof,
Right.
that's different. So there are so few role models for men. Like who do men really have to look up to as a spiritual leader who's really being vulnerable about their sexuality and how to move forward as a conscious masculine? There are so few.
Listen,
There are,
that's very very good point. Really good point. As I because it's an intriguing subject matter, to talk about, and to be able to be engaged in a conversation, not to just ask you questions and wait for you to stop talking and then ask another question, as opposed, there's very few men that you could even talk with it about. You know, I've had mentioned when I mentioned to some of my friends, when you say masculinity and femininity, it's like, dude, what happened to you, man? Like, even if it's not said, it's felt. The air is just, So, and I get it. I'm as guilty as anyone, but it's about just kind of understanding, that comes out of bottoming out in like everything else. There becomes, I've heard God, an acronym for God, God, called gift of desperation. It's, did you ever hear that?
No.
It's what makes you really, there's people that don't pray, but all of a sudden you're
Yeah.
desperate enough.
Yeah.
You're a believer,
Yeah.
an instant believer, So it's the same thing. If I get embarrassed or shamed enough, it's time. Okay, maybe I need to address something. Or if I get, whatever, hypothetically, whatever it is, sometimes it has to be where you just can't any longer just overlook it and just keep on walking.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is unfortunately, or, however it may be, that is the grand majority of people who come to me who have kind of said, I've been shoving this under the rug for a long time and I can't anymore. So what do I do with all of this? And it's natural. I mean, our sexual energy, I believe, is the strongest energy that we have, is the most potent energy that we have. So,
I'll tell you, when it's on, it is.
well, when it's on and when it's off, it comes through in different ways.
Well, that's a
It's,
good point.
yeah, so it's
That's a
really,
good point.
yeah, if there's so many distortions of our sexual energy because we aren't taught about, if we're not engaging with a partner or whatever, we're not taught how to actually interact with it as on our own. And this, I think, is, this is kind of one of my visions moving forward is how do we access people before decades have gone by? How do
Think
we,
about it.
how do we get into the prevention, like crisis prevention mode, where we
Yeah,
don't have as many, we don't have so much human trafficking. We don't have
I
so
know.
many serial rapists. We don't have so many, white collar molestations going on. Get to these people and align them with their sex, their heart, and their head before it's too late and before they've tried everything else and their whole life's crumbling because they're not addressing their emotional issues.
Well, I've never heard somebody speak like eloquently and seriously and openly about it as you are right now.
Do you
We should
think,
call this conversation mindful, mindless.
I mean, I hope to be really mindless because the mind, I don't even really connect with the term mindfulness because I don't want to be full of my mind. I want to get out of here. I want to get into the silence. I don't want my mind to be full. So we can both be mindless, and that's cool.
Yeah, well, it'd be two different levels of mindless at least. Anyway, but
You,
how much of your story are you open to tell? Like
oh,
how
I'm
did this quest start? And
sure. Well, I really, I endured chronic sexual abuse as a child from the ages of 5 to 7. And never, never spoke about it, never told anyone about it, carried it around with me, carried the shame that ensues, carried the fear, carried the insecurity, carried the guilt, everything, that's typical of sexual abuse survivors. And the pain and confusion that came from those events, I had no outlet to deal with that. I didn't know what to do with that. I just knew I couldn't tell my parents or anyone for that matter. So the second I discovered what alcohol was, it was like, oh, that's my ticket to
how
forgetting
old are
pain.
you when that happens?
13.
Wow.
Yeah. So
And you
I,
drank alcoholically from the get go?
yeah, because I was carrying so much suffering
Yeah,
for so
absolutely.
many
Yeah,
years that there's something that will make me not feel it for a minute.
I get that
Let's
loud and
do it.
clear.
So then, switch from vice to vice for the next couple years. So any drug under the sun I could get my hands on. And I did find, I always say the first time I ever meditated in my life, I was having sex. That was the first place.
Is that considered the ultimate?
I mean, there's definitely when we can get into that space of clarity through sexuality,
And when you're
definitely.
experienced at the point you're talking about, you don't even know what that is. You have no
I
idea what's
didn't know what
going on.
it was. I didn't know what Tantra was, anything. But I just remember, uh, I remember tuning into my mind and thinking, "Oh wow, I haven't had a thought in a really long time. Where have I been?" And I that was the first time
Wow.
it actually came into the body, and I was actually in the heart, and I was actually feeling pleasure, and I wasn't thinking about performance, and I wasn't thinking about what I look like or what I sound like or
Literally
whatever.
in the moment, like in every
Just
sense.
in full presence, like just being
Unbelievable. Yeah.
present with what is. It was to chase that experience everywhere, so I went looking for it, and I had tons of lovers,
That's
and
like
it,
what they
it
say
still.
about drug abuse too. Like the first hit, you get high, and then you're just chasing that, right? Was
Correct.
that, you're never going to get that way
Well,
again
I get that all the time, but way
now,
better.
but not that way,
But no, not that way. No.
right? That was almost just like that might have been some kind of an awakening, like a
Well,
subconscious awakening. Do you think? Do you get that deep into it, or do you just?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I really believe that our sex and our spirit are the same thing. And a great way of getting in touch with our spirit is through our sex. It's the polarities of like the low primal energy and the high cosmic energy. Once again, coming together at the heart. So, yeah, I mean, I think it was an awakening, and I think it was actually a call from the universe or from God or from
Mhm.
myself, whatever you want to call it, to start walking down a different path.
Now, are you
Because
openly talking with your friends, like at this point in your life when you had an experience like that you can share with other like girlfriends and stuff, and realize that you're the probably the only one that's ever like nobody can relate with what you're talking about and experience on that level? There's going to be a certain sense of individuality, like something happened to me that
mhm.
nobody, so maybe I need to pay attention to this because there's more significance to it than I may even realize at this moment because now you're aware of a level that nobody else is aware of.
Yeah, yeah, and that was just the bridge into finding out more about what that was, where it came from, and how I can use it to make my life better. There's still a lot of people who aren't ready to have that conversation.
But just with the people that are, if they could find
Yeah.
you,
Well, you know, I always say I'll give you a toolbox. I'll tell you everything I know. I'll give you every tip, every trick, every meditation, every, practice that I know. But if you don't do it and if you don't commit to the long and winding road of going inside your own body,
yeah,
perhaps, digging into some suppressed, uh,
yeah,
to conditioning, ready to essentially, analyze the way that our parents have limited us in many ways. It's not an easy path. There's a lot of bushwhacking to do, let's just say.
it's a great term. It's amazing because some women that I've spoke to and interviewed on the roof for like this, I have gained a level of respect that it's hard to share with people, and it's hearing the stuff that you're probably not so willing to put out there. It's
Mm,
hearing the what's behind your truth,
yeah.
because to see where you were and now see where you are after being there, that climb, that's undisputable. We all struggle,
Yeah.
but owning our truth is a big deal. Male or female, it doesn't matter. Owning the truth, the real truth, the stuff that you don't tell anybody.
Yes.
Being there,
Yeah.
you get rid of that, you're changed.
Absolutely.
It's
And
called cleaning house. The people call it cleaning house.
yep. Yep. I think really what it comes down to, and what perhaps what you're talking about is, and what I work with every day, is identifying our shame.
Yes.
Shame is the thing that limits us the most. It's the
Yes.
lowest vibration. It's, you know, we are this explosion of life and love and energy and color and spice. And shame just puts a wet blanket over top of all of that.
Totally.
And that's what I think has been done.
Smothers the flame.
Exactly. It's been done on a mass scale strategically with our sexual expression, because our sexuality, when it's aligned with our heart, is the most brilliant flower. is the brightest, warmest fire. So there has been religious shame and cultural shame and shame blasted on top of it for a long time. I really see people starting to take their just starting to have the conversation about what does emotional vulnerability look like? What does authentic sexual expression without goal oriented performance look like? Um, and people are really starting to understand, and science is starting to catch up with, how orgasms cure depression and how making love with someone who you're intimate with literally changes your body's physical chemistry.
I don't know if science has not been on top of this. I don't think people want to hear it. Do you know what I'm saying? Sexuality is gratification. The same thing a
Yeah.
drug is. When people are drug addicts, there's a romance going on with this drug. It's like this
Yeah.
whole. It's totally detrimental. I'm not, but it's still the same thing that's happening here. There's different. It's triggering a lot of the same things of pleasure.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
It's
All
what
of our
drives people to act, out of, sexually inappropriate because
yes.
they deem some pleasure out of it.
Yes. So much of my work really is neuroscience.
Really?
It's yes, it's really, our body. I work a lot with somatic experiencing and somatic sex education, and our body is constantly relaying messages to our brain about pleasure and pain all the time. So if you have a favorite food or a favorite drug or a favorite person to make love with, our neural pathways, someone, for example, um, has always had a pleasure wiring towards, let's say, like some BDSM or like some sadomasochistic,
Right.
uh, that kind of tendency, which absolutely nothing wrong with that. I work with people like that all the time, and there's a lot to be said for that path. But if they don't want to continue that kind of approach to sexuality, or if they have a new partner who doesn't like it, for example, they come to me and they say, I have to just like, cut it out, and I have to just cut it off. And it's no, we don't have to cut anything off. Let's just switch around the neuroplasticity.
How do
Let's
you
just
do that? How do you do that?
we create new pleasure, literally new neural pathways through pleasure. So if before someone needed a lot of stimulation until, the point of violence, let's say having a smack to feel that pleasure response, if they need violence, like if they need, a lot of stimulus to feel sensation, most likely they can't feel the soft caress on the cheek. They don't have the
Right.
nervous sensitivity for that. So how do we cultivate it? Okay, we don't, this isn't pleasurable for us anymore, but we can't feel this. Okay, so where do we start? We get a feather and we tickle our own body and we feel all the part that we feel nothing. We don't feel anything. Okay. But then we keep doing it and we cultivate this sensitivity, and eventually our brain, actually, it's not eventually, it's very fast. Our brain creates a new neural pathway that says, this softness actually feels really
So
nice.
you change the perception, like this is going to feel good, like you instill that perception in somebody's thought process.
It's really the body that does the work. The body recognizes, oh, this is nice. And then the pathway's made. And then you reinforce that pathway and you strengthen it like a muscle. And then all of a sudden, this can feel very, very, very orgasmic, where last month you couldn't feel it at all. So then this feels great. So then the thought of having, a smack, that's not good anymore. We don't want that anymore. So it's really, I work a lot with neuroplasticity.
Yeah. Well, are there things that you think are just unhealthy practices?
I think anything that is done between two or more consensual beings who are in an intentional space of discovery through sexuality from a conscious uh, adult space and mindset,
Mm-hmm.
everything is welcome. Tantra is the one place that I've found in my life that actually doesn't judge. Like I said, as long as we are operating from a conscious place within the boundaries of consent, all is welcome.
Yeah, I agree with you on a judgmental error. Absolutely, like whatever two people, I mean, three people, whatever people want
Yeah,
to do. I mean, if
yeah.
it's, I agree with that. But I'm
Hmm.
just saying, from the clinical perspective, are there things that are just like could affect your psyche, could affect your own self esteem, could
Hmm.
affect a lot of
Sure.
other areas of your life? You know?
Well, there's a school of thought that uh, that basically says that men can benefit from controlling or retaining their ejaculation. There's a lot of people who talk about that as being a key to longevity, a key to vitality. So when men ejaculate chronically, there are some people who say that they may be losing a lot of life force and a lot of energy through that. So that's one school of thought to consider. And
Do
this
you
is, of course,
subscribe to that school of thought?
everyone's different. I think in some people, absolutely, they are draining themselves a bit, but in other people, they manage to balance it. So,
Hmm.
there's no recipe.
Right.
Everyone is so unique, and especially when it comes to our sexuality, we've been homogenized when each one of us is our own beautiful, unique snowflake. And it's really time we start honoring and remembering ourselves as such.
Right.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, I could go on and on and on. Let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for your time. And I really, really, really will talk in 1 second about doing this again because we haven't even begun. You have a lot to say, and you're as good as anybody
Thanks,
as far as
Scott.
delivering the message.
Really, I'm so grateful to be on here and just spreading the love. And I really want to empower anyone who's listening right now to really take your sexuality into your own hands, literally. Start to enjoy your body. Start to enjoy your sexual expression in a way that feels authentic for you today.
Really quick, how does somebody that would be interested in working with you, how do they contact you and find you?
So I have my website, www.vasantikea.com. I'm available on Instagram, vasanti.kea, Facebook as well. And yeah, please reach out to me. My email address is vasanti@truelovetantra.com. I look forward to hearing from you.
All right. Thank you so much, and we'll do this again real soon.
Thank you,
All
Scott. It was
right.
such